Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to your forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a look at the watches, warnings, and advisories that we do have out for the state. We'll start off in the Panhandle area in the far northern locations. We do have winter weather advisories out for snow, and those are going to be in effect from 6 p.m. this evening until 9 a.m. on Thursday. Now that is for snow of accumulations up to 6 inches with gusty winds up to as high as 40 miles per hour. And these are specifically for some of the higher areas, such as the South Klondike Highway above 1,000 feet, and along the Haines Highway for areas west of Haines. Again, this is winter weather advisories for snow up to 6 inches, 6 p.m. this evening to 9 a.m. on Thursday. As we move up into mainland portions of the state, quite a few areas of activity out along the west coast, especially around the Kotzebue Sound area. We have winter storm warnings out for snow and heavy snow and blowing snow that's resulting in some areas with blizzard conditions. This is going to be out for all of these in through this evening. We are going to see visibilities dropping down to as low as a quarter mile at times. On the southern side of the Seward Peninsula, however, we still have some areas of higher surf. It's going to start to taper down here, but that could last into tomorrow morning, and we are going to see up to as high as 3 to 5 feet above normal high tide mark. Up along the Arctic coastline, we have some winter weather advisories out. All of these are for blowing snow. They're all going to be in effect starting now, actually, as the western locations going to go out until midnight tonight. As we get to more central locations, as late as 3 a.m. on Thursday morning. And then in the far eastern locations of the North Slope, we are looking at those blowing snow conditions lasting until 6 a.m. on Thursday. For the western and central portions of the interior, for Galena, Tanana, and Bettles, and far south is Grayling, we are looking at winter weather advisories there, also for snow and blowing snow. These are going to start to last later and later from west to east, getting into tomorrow, with some going as late as noon on Thursday, those ones for Tanana and Bettles area. And we'll expect expiration times earlier as we move further to the west. Then out in the Alaska range, we have 3 high wind warnings that are still in effect. Winds could get up to as high as 80 miles per hour. And we do have those expiring at 8 p.m. this evening, so we do expect those winds to start tapering down here as we move later into the evening hours. Finally, as we move out over the Aleutian Islands area in the central Aleutians, we have a high wind watch that is in effect. This area could see winds up to as high as 85 miles per hour and will be in effect from Thursday evening to Friday morning. So quite a bit of activity going around in the state. If you have more questions about your area, please go to our website, weather.gov/Alaska, and check out specific information for your area, or if there are any updates to these watches, warnings, and advisories. Taking a look now at one of the causes of a lot of these, especially for those areas to the northern part of the state, we have this storm is pulling in moisture from 2,000 miles away out over the Pacific Ocean, bringing that long moisture fetch into mainland parts of the state with a lot of snow and blowing snow conditions with that storm. Some of the winds that we have seen for the northern half of the state will start with some of the strongest winds that are out through areas around the Alaska range. At Antler Creek on the Parks Highway up to as high as 86 miles per hour, Texas Condo near Delta Junction, 80 miles per hour. As we move to the kind of northwestern portions of the state, Red Dog Dock at 67, and other areas around the area in the 50s and 60s, with Nome even there at 52 degrees. And as we move up along the Arctic coastline, some strong winds up there as well in the mid-40s for areas of Dead Horse, Ukqiagvik, and Point Thompson. So look down in South Central Alaska at some of the total snow that we expect for areas around South Central. Now, this snow amount accumulation map does account for some snow that started as early as 6 p.m. yesterday on Tuesday and will go until 9 a.m. on Thursday. So we're looking at those storm total snow amounts with some of the heaviest amounts along the North Gulf Coast, lighter amounts for areas that are away from the coastal ranges. We also had the high wind warning in effect for Turnagain area, but that has since expired, so we're just focusing on those snow amounts right now. Looking at our satellite imagery, we can see that major system moving through the area that's bringing a lot of the conditions to the west coast. The primary low we'll notice out near the northeastern portions of Russia, and then a new low has formed if we look down in the northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska. Starting by Kodiak Island, as we walk through this, we'll see that low forming with a new system, or a new frontal system, pushing through the Gulf of Alaska. And as we look out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, we can see a lot of shower activity out there, pushing from west to east in those strong westerly winds, with the trough moving through the eastern Aleutian Islands area. As we look at the weather for the remainder of the day, we can see that trough helping to push in some more showers to the Aleutian Islands, with widespread snow showers throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. A little bit warmer east of that trough, however, and we're going to see a mixture of rain and snow for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. And along the west coast, the remnants of the old front, before it split with that new low near the Kenai Peninsula area now, still bringing in a lot of snow and blowing snow conditions with some of the stronger winds to the west coast, especially along the Arctic coastline where we'll see some of those stronger winds up there with those blowing snow conditions. That snow is going to extend into the interior portions of the state, as well as through South Central Alaska, where our other system is bringing in another influx of warmer air to the North Gulf Coast, resulting in a mixture of rain and snow along the North Gulf Coast and to central areas of the Panhandle as well. Northern locations in the Panhandle still expected to stay with snow, where we do have those winter weather advisories out in that region. As we move into tonight, that new system out over the Gulf is going to push further to the east, pumping in more moisture to the Panhandle area. Primarily going to see a lot of rain for areas near the Gulf and for southern locations, mixing more to snow as you get further to the north. Mainland Alaska is still going to see widespread snow from South Central Alaska through Southwest Alaska up through the interior and west coast, as well as the Arctic coastline. Still going to see some areas of blowing snow tonight along the Arctic coastline as well. And then as we drop down into the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, still cold enough there in the westerly flow to see widespread snow showers throughout the area, as our trough that was over the eastern Aleutians is now pushed in towards the southwest coastline. Taking a look on Thursday, we will have another system coming up from the south that's going to bring another round of warmer air to the Aleutian Islands, helping to mix over the snow showers in the central and eastern Aleutians to a mix of rain and snow as that system comes up from the south. And you can notice that much of the flow out over the Bering Sea has become more southerly, resulting in some of the warmer air tracking further to the north. That snow out over the Bering is going to extend out over the Alaska Peninsula as well as southwest Alaska and up some of the coastline. Then we'll see more snow for eastern interior. The Brooks Range and the Arctic coastline will have some lingering areas of blowing snow up by the AKwx area. Down in South Central Alaska, we are still expected to see snow and a mixture of rain and snow for Kodiak Island, as a weaker low is pushing through the northwestern portions of the Gulf. Down in the Panhandle area, we're going to see some rain showers for central and southern locations, and then snow as we get closer towards the coastal ranges. Finally, as we move into Friday, high pressure out over Canada is starting to clear out some of the precipitation for the Panhandle. However, we will still have some lingering showers, mix of rain and snow for the southern portions of the Panhandle. We have another bigger system coming in towards the Alaska Peninsula area, bringing a lot of stronger winds and another push of warmer air to the area, resulting in a mixture of rain and snow for the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Ahead of this system, we are expecting to see some snow for southwest Alaska, as well as some snow throughout south central Alaska. Some clearing through the interior and some of the west coast before we see some more snow showers in the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline, mixture of fog up there along the coast as well. Then down over the far western portions of the state, we'll see some snow over the western Bering Sea as well as the western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our temperatures for Thursday morning, we are expecting temperatures to drop down into the mid to lower 30s for the Aleutian Islands. In southwest Alaska, dropping down into the mid-20s, staying in the mid-20s for much of the west coast, and then dropping down into the teens in the western and central interior, down to the single digits for some of the more eastern locations. Up along the Arctic coastline, single digits are expected for the most part, Wainwright getting down to -1. Down in south central Alaska, temperature is going to drop down into the mid-20s for most locations, colder in more inland locations, and then a little bit warmer along the coast. Down in southeast Alaska, into the mid to upper 30s is expected. Thursday afternoon highs getting up into the mid-40s in southern locations of the Panhandle and the upper 30s for northern locations. In the 30s for much of south central Alaska and teens for much of the interior until we push to the west where we'll start to get into the 20s and eventually the 30s along the west coast. Up along the Arctic coastline staying in the single digits for the most part and into the 40s or near 40 for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula. So move into Friday morning, dropping down to the mid-30s for the Aleutians, down to the 20s along the west coast, and then teens as we push further inland, single digits for much of the interior, with some locations getting below zero. Along the Arctic coastline, most locations will get below zero. However, Reykjavik will stay a little bit warmer at 3 degrees. Into the teens for south central until we get by the Gulf, where we'll stay in the 20s, and then into the upper 20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle, warmer farther to the south. Afternoon highs on Friday into the 30s for the Panhandle area, into the 20s for much of south central. Right around 10 degrees for the interior, getting warmer as we get further to the west, near 30 degrees along the southwest coastline, 20 degrees further north along the west coast, and into the 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Thursday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread MVFR conditions with a lot of those showers moving through the area. You're going to see those MVFR conditions also moving into much of the west coast of the state. And we'll see some IFR mixing in as we get closer towards the Brooks Range. That IFR conditions are going to extend into the interior as well as some areas of south central Alaska, with more MVFR conditions for the rest of the interior and south central. Down in the Panhandle area, we are going to see some MVFR conditions in central and northern locations and becoming more IFR as we get further to the south. Also up along the North Slope area, primarily VFR conditions expected. As we move into Thursday afternoon, some MVFR conditions creeping up into areas of the North Slope, but some areas remaining VFR. Then IFR conditions for the Brooks Range, and primarily MVFR conditions for the interior and the west coast of the state, as well as much of southwest Alaska. The south central area is going to be more MVFR and IFR along the North Gulf Coast, with some areas of VFR further inland. Down in southeast Alaska, we're going to see primarily MVFR conditions with some pockets of IFR expected. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian, central and eastern locations expected to be MVFR with IFR conditions further to the west. For Friday morning, we are expecting IFR conditions for the southern portions of the Bering Sea as well as out by the Alaska Peninsula, with MVFR conditions in most other places of the Bering and Aleutians. For mainland Alaska, we're going to see several different pockets of MVFR conditions. One is going to be in interior locations of southwest Alaska, extending up towards the Norton Sound area. Then as we get into areas closer towards the Brooks Range, we're expecting to see more IFR conditions that are going to extend just off the coastline of northwest Alaska. Down in the south central area from the Anchorage area through the North Gulf Coast, we're going to see some IFR conditions, and then we're going to see some MVFR conditions in the northern places of the Panhandle, VFR conditions in central and southern locations. For Friday afternoon, continuing to see VFR conditions for central and southern locations of the Panhandle, with MVFR conditions further to the north, as well as along much of the North Gulf Coast into the eastern portions of Prince William Sound. Interior locations of south central will see MVFR conditions, and then primarily VFR conditions for the interior. Up in the Brooks Range and southern locations of the North Slope, expecting IFR conditions. And then down the west coast, as we get closer towards the Norton Sound area and Yukon Delta, we are going to see primarily VFR conditions with some pockets of MVFR as we get further down towards Bristol Bay. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, a mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions are expected for most locations. However, as we get further to the north and west, we will see some VFR conditions. For the passes, AKwx will start off MVFR, dropping down to IFR in the afternoon, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark will start off with VFR, then drop down to marginal. However, Merrill will stay marginal throughout the day on Thursday. Rainy should start off marginal and then improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Windy will start off IFR and improve to MVFR in the afternoon. Isabel Pass should stay marginal conditions throughout the day on Thursday, as well as at Mintasta Pass. Tanita will start off IFR, then should improve all the way to VFR in the afternoon. Portage should also start off IFR, improving to VFR conditions in the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White should both be marginal throughout the day Thursday. For our freezing levels, surface freezing line through the northern portions of the Bering Sea, then down through the Bristol Bay area and along the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle area. Some warmer air coming up into the southern portions of the Panhandle, with freezing levels as high as 4,000 feet over the southern locations. For our icing, quite a bit of icing with the activity we have out with a lot of the showers out over the Bering below 7,000 feet is expected. Those showers out by the Aleutians below 4,000 feet. Below 4,000 feet also for the North Gulf Coast to include Kodiak Island. And then out over mainland Alaska, south or northwestern portions below 6,000 feet, below 4,000 feet over the interior, and then below 10,000 feet over the Panhandle. For our winds, starting with the jet stream, strongest winds are going to be near the central Aleutian Islands, just to the south of the area, westerly flow 130 knots. Out over the Panhandle area, southwesterly winds up to as high as 100 knots, and then at southeasterly winds over the Kotzebue Sound area, 70 knots, increasing to 95 knots to the west. For 9,000 feet, strongest winds are going to be out over the western Bering Sea, including the central and western Aleutians, with westerly flow 60 to 65 knots possible. Out over mainland Alaska, westerly winds up to as high as 30 knots, and then out over the northern portions of the Gulf, 45 knots out of that westerly direction. The Panhandle area could see winds up to as high as 50 knots out of a southwesterly direction, and along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds up to as high as 40 knots. For 3,000 feet, picking up those winds along the Arctic coastline up to as high as 55 knots out of a southeasterly direction, 40 knots to 45 knots out of a westerly direction over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, North Gulf Coast area, 35 knots out of the west, and 35 knots out of the southwest for the Panhandle. For our turbulence, below 3,000 feet for the Aleutians, below 4,000 feet for the Alaska Peninsula, and below 6,000 feet for south central and southeast.
What we're looking at is a legacy of the Ice Age. Permafrost and methane is a time machine. So what we're going to do is walk back in time. We're going to see old carbon, old bones, old environments, and none of those are in equilibrium with today's climate, so that's the problem. That world doesn't exist anymore, and it hasn't for 10,000 years. It was nicely and very delicately separated from this modern warmer climate by about this much moss. And when that moss goes away, whether for fire or for human disturbance or for warming, then all hell breaks loose.
Permafrost. It's maybe the part of the cryosphere that's most out of sight and mind. It's fascinating how it formed in the first place and how it got loaded with so much carbon. In a minute, we'll go back underground with Matthew Sturm from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. But first, let's meet Peter Griffith, NASA's project manager for the Above campaign, which supports more than 70 science projects studying forest and tundra vegetation, wildfires, animals like birds, caribou, and Dall sheep, methane emissions from expanding northern lakes, and the impacts of climate change on people in Alaska, Canada, and around the world. Many of those projects have some direct connection to permafrost.
Permafrost is the hidden cryosphere. It's the permanently frozen soil that surrounds the Arctic, all across Alaska, northern Canada, and then across Eurasia. The ground has been frozen during the ice ages.
During the ice ages, there was not enough snowfall in the drier regions of Alaska and Canada to form glaciers there, so the land was suitable for vegetation.
What happened is that over thousands and thousands of years, all of that plant material got compacted and frozen every winter and buried and pushed down, so that today there's 300 feet deep of frozen water and dead plants and some pieces of dead animals too. Sometimes you find woolly mammoths in the permafrost. But most of it, of the organic matter as we call it in the permafrost, is frozen plant material.
Some of that plant material is now thawing and decaying, releasing its ancient carbon into the atmosphere, sometimes in the form of methane gas bubbling out of expanding northern lakes.
We started this field campaign because the Arctic is the part of the planet that is warming first and fastest. And there are consequences to this for permafrost. So during the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, we're studying permafrost with people on the ground, from aircraft flying over the region, and also from satellites in space.
Another way to understand the permafrost is to take a walk below ground with Matthew Sturm and into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permafrost tunnel.
And they've dug this tunnel back into the side of a hill about 200 feet, and it goes sort of sloping down so that by the end of the tunnel you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons that are frozen in it. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old, that you can touch with your hand. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old because it got frozen, right away, and it's never lost the green color.
But as fascinating as it is to see these relics of an ancient era, or to see a tree split in half by thawing soil, or even to light a ball of methane on fire from under winter ice, at the end of the day, Peter and his colleagues want to know just how much organic matter is frozen in that permafrost, and how fast it might be released.
Currently, we think that there is something on the order of 2 to 3 times as much carbon locked up as frozen organic matter in permafrost as there is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So releasing all of that organic carbon from permafrost into the atmosphere would be a real game changer. That would be a tremendous transformation of the planet's atmosphere. Now, the good news is that it would take a very, very long time for that to happen. However, we are warming the planet at a rate now that calls into question how quickly is that changing and what the consequences in the near future and in the far future are going to be.
You're in the middle of a field somewhere in California at 4 a.m. It's sort of surreal in a way because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, it's a big deal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Major thing to note is with that system moving through the west coast and all the warm air that it did bring up with it, we did see a lot of melting of ice from Bristol Bay up through the YK Delta. Very little ice remains on that southwest coastline. And then some degradation of the ice in Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound as well. Taking a look down in southeast Alaska on Thursday in the inside waters, southerly component to the winds 20 to 30 knots with the strongest winds further to the north. However, some gusty winds with up to 40 knots for those gusts in the central portions of the inside waters. Out over the Gulf waters, westerly winds 20 to 25 knots expected, seas up to as high as 17 feet. On Friday in the inside waters, northerly winds 10 to 20 knots, highest as we get farther to the north. And then in the Gulf waters, east to southeast winds in eastern portions, 20 knots expected, becoming south 20 to 25 as we get to the northern portions of the Gulf. For south central Alaska on Thursday, in the Gulf waters, we have southerly winds 30 knots in western locations, becoming westerly 25 to 30 knots in the northerly locations. West winds 20 knots in Prince William Sound, and northerly winds 15 knots in the Cook Inlet area, extending down west of the Barren Islands. On Friday in the Cook Inlet area, lighter winds 15 down as low as 10 knots, and around the Barren Islands area, south to southeast winds 25 knots expected, becoming southwesterly 30 knots for the rest of the Gulf of Alaska, and then in Prince William Sound, southwesterly winds 25 knots expected. Out over the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas on Thursday, around Kodiak Island and Shelikof Strait, southwest winds 20 knots, and then on the east side of the island, southerly winds 30 knots expected. Westerly winds for the peninsula 20 to 25 knots, stronger as we get further to the west. Then on Friday, we'll start to see some stronger winds for the peninsula area, primarily out of a somewhat southerly direction. 35 to 40 knots expected, with seas up to as high as 27 feet south of the peninsula. For Kodiak Island area, southeasterly winds 25 knots in Shelikof Strait, and southerly winds 35 knots east of the island. For the Aleutian Islands on Thursday, for the eastern Aleutians, westerly winds 30 knots, becoming more southerly by the central Aleutians, 30 to 35 knots. And then south to southeast winds 40 to 45 knots by the western Aleutians, seas up to as high as 19 feet, highest for the more western locations. On Friday, winds really start to pick up, especially for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. Winds to as high as 60 knots on the Bering side of the islands, with seas up to as high as 36 to 37 feet on the Pacific side of the eastern Aleutian Islands. Winds around 50 knots for the eastern Aleutians out of a southwest direction. And then for the western Aleutian Islands, westerly winds 40 to 45 knots with seas 23 to 24 feet. Along the west coast of the state, south to southwest winds, 15 knots in northern locations, getting up stronger as we get south of Nunavik Island area, 20 knots there, and 25 knots by the Pribilof Islands out of a westerly direction. For Friday, easterly winds expected in most locations, 15 to 20 knots up north, 30 to 40 knots as we get closer towards Nunavik Island, stronger on the south side. Northeast winds 25 knots by St. Matthew Island, and northeast winds 30 knots by the Pribilof Islands, seas up to as high as 14 feet. Up along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 30 knots are expected, getting up to 40 knots west of Wainwright. Still have that easterly direction, dropping down to 25 knots by Cape Lisburne, and then going more southerly by the Strait, around 15 knots there. On Friday, easterly winds all along the west coast, 20 knots south of the Strait, 10 knots to the north, and getting up to 20 to 25 knots along the northwest coastline. Along the Arctic coast, easterly winds 15 to 20 knots are expected. For a recap of tonight's weather, our system has began to push through much of the interior portion of the state, bringing snow not only to the west coast but also throughout the interior. We do have quite a few watches, warnings, and advisories out for the state. Several of those along the west coast, winter storm warnings that will expire later this evening for snow and blowing snow conditions that could drop visibilities down to a quarter mile or less around the Kotzebue Sound area. In the central and western interior, we have winter weather advisories out that will last into early tomorrow. That will bring some snow and blowing snow to those areas. High wind warnings out for the Alaska range that will be in effect until 9 p.m. this evening, especially through the gaps of the Richardson and Parks highways. We'll have some blowing snow conditions up along the Arctic coast where we have winter weather advisories out for blowing snow conditions out there. Going to be for western locations expiring around midnight, far eastern locations 6 a.m. on Thursday. We also have a high wind watch out for the central Aleutian Islands that will be in effect Thursday evening to Friday morning. Winds could gust up to as high as 85 miles per hour there, with another strong system coming up from the south. Then out over the Panhandle area, we have a winter weather advisory for snow that's going to be out from 6 p.m. this evening to 9 a.m. on Thursday. On Thursday, we'll see another system approaching the central Aleutians, but snow for much of the Bering Sea, mainland Alaska, and down into northern places of the Panhandle, with rain further to the south.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.